As soon as people don't call oil and black gold and the blood of the earth, and there is a perfectly understandable explanation for that. Oil is the main type of fuel for modern transport, and oil is 40% of all electricity produced on the globe. I love oil. Oil policy goes hand in hand. There is no doubt that the presence of oil in the region was one of the reasons for the coup. Today, oil is a symbol of prosperity and wealth. It is not surprising that such bottles with black gold are fashionable today to give to successful businessmen. Many people dream of owning their own oil rig and forget about financial problems. A resident of the Ukrainian city of Borisov shakes it right in his garden. The man drilled a well and installed all the necessary equipment. Bachu, here is such a pup bachu in the garden, there is a yak about a well, it's right to say, it pumps naphtha. It's a joke. It is believed that the exchange rates of world currencies and the welfare of citizens depend on oil. Many riddles and paradoxes are connected with it. Venezuela, where there is more oil than anywhere else, has the worst economy in the world.
Angela, you have a ticket. Step aside.
Disabled people line up here.
Don't push, you'll fall.
And in Saudi Arabia, where there is less black gold, the once Bedouin society has turned into one of the richest in the Middle East, with access to all modern benefits. For example, Saudi Prince Al-Walid and Bantalal bought seats in the business class cabin from the airline to transport his beloved falcons. 80 birds of prey flew like real passengers. But why? After all, he has two of his own planes, on board one of which, according to some reports, there is a stable and a marble hammam. Or maybe what journalists write about the luxurious life of Arab princes is all a myth. In general, there are a lot of legends related to oil and the wealth that accompany it. And today, we are going to try to figure out which of all this is true and which is false and shed light on some of the darkest secrets of oil. Today in the program, to download or not to download, that's the question. Russia. This is a gas station that only pretends to be a country. How do those who do not have their own oil fields live? What is the oil money spent on? And how the black market of hydrocarbons works. Only today, and only we have the whole truth about oil. Oil is a combustible dark oily liquid. It can be black, red, and even white. In each deposit, its properties and composition are unique. Scientists are still arguing about the origin of oil. The overwhelming majority believes that it is a mineral, the product of underground centuries-old processing, of the remains of ancient plants and animals, but there are also those who talk about its inorganic, mineral origin. Another interesting fact is that oil deposits are formed not where oil originates. Black gold has been traveling between the layers of the earth for many thousands of years until it meets obstacles, so-called traps. Underground lakes appear. That's where the oil is pumped out. In general, people knew about the combustible properties of black gold 6,000 years ago. In Russia, oil began to be used on an industrial scale under Peter the Great to lubricate wheels, in medicines and incendiary mixtures. This year, by the way, we will celebrate 300 years of the Russian oil and gas industry, oil production there. That is, the first oil in this industrial way was 1721st year. This is the Yukta River. So, accordingly, it was mined and supplied to Peter the Great. But the real history of oil began with the invention of kerosene. Back in 1823 year, the Cerf brothers Vasily, Gerasim and Makar Dubinin created the first oil refinery and isolated this light flammable liquid from it, which was perfectly suitable for lighting. So it was impossible to use it for lighting. Smokes, and in general it's unpleasant, yes. And after distillation, the so-called white oil was obtained, which no longer smoked, did not spare. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, oil was produced only in the Caucasus. The state list of income and expenses, as the budget was then called, was replenished most of all by state railways and the wine monopoly. At the same time, 70% of all income of the Russian Empire from foreign trade was provided by agriculture, the sale of wheat, butter, and chicken eggs. In Soviet times, everything changed. There was a full understanding at the state level that oil is a raw material for the future economy. In order to make your cars, tanks, cars, tractors, agricultural machinery, anything move. In the 60s of the last century, the Samitler field was discovered, and by that time everything was ready in the world to meet with Soviet oil. The consumption of gasoline, jet fuel, and petrochemical raw materials grew rapidly. The USSR became the leader in oil production in the world, ahead of the United States. We have been able to extract and export more and more. We have become a country that has turned out to be very important for world trade relations. And in this regard, the stability of the ruble was actually guaranteed, because our international reserves were accumulating. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia's budget began to pay attention. 80% dependent on hydrocarbons. Perhaps it was then that they started talking about our country sitting on an oil needle. 2014 year. On CNN, Republican Senator John McCain calls for economic sanctions against Russia. Russia, if you like, is a gas station that only pretends to be a country. And this is the 2020th year. Also a senator, a former presidential candidate, Mormon Mitt Romney, reacted in this way to the recent cyber attacks on us government institutions, allegedly committed by Russian hackers. Russia. This is a gas station that only pretends to be a country. Many representatives of the Western establishment do not tire of emphasizing that our country's economy is completely dependent on hydrocarbons, which means that the West can effectively put pressure on Russia. But is this really the case? According to the World Bank, the share of oil in the economy of our country for the 2020th year is 11%. About the same for Norway, slightly less for the United States. If you look not at stock exchange games, but at the statistics of real goods and services, and at the same time, if possible, translate it into natural terms. In order to get rid of a significant difference in the price structure, it turns out that Americans are sitting on the oil needle, no less than the forms. Who blows up oil rigs? How to make money on the pipe? Stay tuned. Libya has the highest share of oil in the economy by as much as 47%, Iraq 36%. Saudi Arabia has the share of black gold in GDP, 17%, and the United Arab Emirates has 16%. It is worth noting that the figures include the volume of exports of crude oil only, excluding petroleum products. We compare Russia with other countries again. Yes, we are comparable to Saudi Arabia in terms of production there. And we export 50% of our oil. Yes, and the Saudis are sending 95%. But again, the Americans do not call themselves or Saudi Arabia a gas station. For some reason, they call only us. But what does our budget consist of? 70% of the Russian budget is already formed, not at the expense of oil and gas revenues. This means that we are not fully, but we are still starting to get off the so-called oil and gas needle. Agree, 30% of the budget, which is formed at the expense of oil revenues, is far from 80%, which were at the collapse of the USSR. But who benefits from the myth that Russia is sitting on an oil needle? Experts are sure that all of this, part of the propaganda that is directed against our country. This thesis began to develop in the 90s just to justify the defeatism of the Soviet elite and bureaucracy. That, they say, we could not withstand the competition of the West. And in fact, this thesis is artificial. So, the myth that Russia is a gas station country does not correspond to reality. Oil as an energy source displaced coal only in the 10th years of the last century. Soon, major economic crises began to occur because of it. In 1973, 79, 86, 98, and more recently, in 2014 and 2020 years. In 1960, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, appeared. And here's another myth. The prices of black gold have been regulated by OPEC since 1960. But what kind of omnipotent organization is this, and why is there a need for it? OPEC was created by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, as a response to the cartel of the Seven Sisters group of oil companies. It included the Dutch, British, and American corporations British Petroleum, Chevron, Exxon, Gulf, Mobil, Royal Dutch Shell, and Tikka. These major players in the oil market deliberately underestimated the price of black gold and tried to influence the economy of other countries. At some point in the peak, these Seven Sisters, IDS, the largest oil companies, controlled up to 90% of the world oil market. Later, 9 more countries joined OPEC. Since then, the production quota has been regulated by this organization. Each participating country under the agreement can produce a certain amount of crude oil per year. This makes it possible to stabilize hydrocarbon prices. But does the price of black gold really depend only on these quotas? OPEC is only, well, about a third, a little more than a third of world production. Yes, we also need to tighten up other countries. In April of the 2020 year, the price of oil did not just fall to zero. Its value dropped to -$40. But how is this possible? A month earlier, Saudi Arabia dramatically increased its production without warning anyone. The market was oversupplied with oil, and the demand for it fell. But why did the Saudis do this? They have a lot of oil. They are even ready to work at a loss in order to simply make oil production in Russia unprofitable. Another example. 1985. In 6 years, the price of black gold has dropped from $35 per barrel to $10. The USSR suffered the most from this. They destroyed the Soviet Union. Why has oil started to fall? Because rather, they were the initiator of this, but the customer, of course, is America. So what happens? Are there countries that, contrary to OPEC agreements, can unilaterally both increase oil production and reduce it? But why is Saudi Arabia doing this? The most profitable companies in the world, until the 2020 year, was not Apple, not Amazon, and not Google, but the Saudi oil company Saudi Aframe. For the 2019 year, its profit amounted to more than $100 billion against $60 billion. From the leader of the technology sector in this indicator, Apple. Saudi Arabia Frame is the economic and financial backbone of Saudi Arabia. This is how the capital of this country, Riyadh, looked like in the 50s of the last century. And here she is these days. Now Saudi Arabia, the leader of the Middle East in the number of billionaires. Well, where else will camel owners inject their pets with Botox? All for the sake of winning the camel beauty contest, because such a blonde can cost more than $1 million. And this is one of the king's palaces. The buildings are estimated at $60 million, which is more than 4 billion rubles. And here is the golden car of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The car costs about $12 million, translated into rubles is 925 million. But as a result of the pandemic, the demand for oil fell, and this could not but affect the well-being of the sheikhs. According to the International Monetary Fund, Saudi Arabia's budget has a hole of $100 billion, and the country's economy has shrunk by almost 4%. The United States also faced no less problems. February 2021 year. The total volume of oil production in the country fell by a third. It's all the fault of abnormal frosts, which stopped the work of drilling rigs. In Texas alone, the largest oil-bearing region of the United States, production collapsed by 65%. Experts said, the world is facing the threat of a new global hydrocarbon crisis. As American oil is exported to dozens of countries, the market immediately reacted and black gold rose in price. It turns out that the price of oil was affected by natural disasters, about OPEC's lack of agreement. Another example. The Suez Canal was blocked the other day. It was blocked by a large container ship, which turned across the traffic. As a result, more than 100 ships stopped, including those with more than 10 million barrels of oil and petroleum products on board. The markets reacted immediately. World prices for black gold rose by almost $3 per barrel during the day. It turns out that the opinion that oil prices depend only on OPEC is also erroneous. See further what Saudi sheikhs spend petrodollars on. How to make money on oil and not go to jail. Stay tuned. Another myth about black gold. For the past few decades, the West has been fighting for democratic values, and oil has nothing to do with it. But is this really the case? Since 2011 year, there has been a civil war in Syria between supporters of the current government and the so-called Free Army, the opposition, as well as with various terrorist organizations. In the 2014 year, the United States, leading the so-called international coalition, entered Syria, officially, to fight against terrorists. But in fact, we are concerned about our interests. We are saving oil. We have oil. Our army controls its security. We stayed only for oil. And these, apparently, are not empty words. So, in the 2020 year, the American company Delta Energy LC not only concluded a cooperation agreement with an anti-government armed group for oil production in Syria, but also received a special permit from the US Treasury to work in this country. This is stated in the joint statement of the Interdepartmental Coordination Headquarters of the Russian Federation and Syria of September 2020 year. This is how Daniel Kalik, a well-known journalist, commented on the current situation on the air of the Iraqi channel. What you see is absolute lawlessness. For some reason, the US government believes that it can invade any country at any time to promote its interests. What is this, if not an aggressive war? According to the journalist, the co-founders of Delta Crescent Energy LC are well enriched at the expense of Syrian black gold. Through front persons, according to some reports, the company earns up to $5 billion a year. These shots were taken in Libya in the 2011 year. NATO planes bomb oil tanks. And this is 2016, Iraq. The oil pipeline is burning. Here is a document of the National Security Agency, on the basis of which Edward Snowden concluded that the Islamic State was founded by agents of the Special Services of Israel, the United States, and Great Britain. The goal: control of the oil market in the Middle East. According to various estimates, the daily income of ISIS militants and those who control them from smuggling black gold is about $2 million. And here's another interesting fact. This information was provided by representatives of the Russian Ministry of Defense at a press conference in the 2019 year. The map shows 14 areas in Syria where oil is extracted. All of them are controlled by mercenaries of the famous American private army Blackwater. There is a long trail of blood behind these people. Therefore, recently the company has regularly changed its name, then to Z Service, now to the Academy. Syrian oil is being sold to the Iraqi cities of Erbil and Kirkuk. Curiously, Blackwater translates as dark water, and the same thing is written on barrels of oil that are illegally exported from Syria. Every 2 weeks, dozens of empty American trucks and tankers enter Syria from Iraq, then return to Iraq, filled with stolen Syrian oil. Recently, the Syrian news agency SANA reported that 85 similar trucks and tankers illegally crossed the border with Iraq. The convoy was accompanied by 16 armored vehicles without identification numbers. According to American journalist, human rights activist Daniel Kallick, money from the sale of black gold is laundered through branches of the American Union Bank and the Qatari bank Al Baraka Bank in Iraq. The scheme is simple. With the help of mercenaries, cash from oil sales is transported to a bank branch, and every 10 to 15 days, they are transported by plane from there to the States. There, money is withdrawn through third-party accounts. But, according to experts, the money received from illegal oil production is not the most important thing. What is important for Americans is that dollars are calculated for oil sold all over the world. The history of petrodollars goes back to 1974 year. This is told by William Engdahl, a professor at Princeton University, PhD in economics. He spent half his life in the archives of the CIA. They will never allow OPEC to sell oil in any currency other than the dollar. It was in 1974 year that Richard Nixon, the 37th leader of the United States of America, agreed with Saudi Arabia that it would sell all of its oil only for dollars, in exchange for military assistance and protection of fields, including from Israel, and in 1975 year, the entire OPEC agrees to sell oil only for US monetary units. Germany desperately wanted to switch to paying for oil in stamps, and in return supply Iran and other countries with German machines. France and Japan wanted the same thing. Washington has done everything to prevent this from happening. Oil is extracted nowadays with the help of wells. It rises to the surface by gravity under the influence of pressure, or it is pumped out of the depths by special rocking pumps. The brand variety is considered a reference or marker. 70% of the world's oil supplies are estimated in relation to the brand. Did you know that the brand has not existed since the 2002 year of the oil tank? Until the year before last, various other oils from various other fields were mixed with the oil of the brand field. It should have been called BFE. Yes, here is the name of 4 deposits. Then the Troll Norwegian deposit was added. BFO Ed should be called Oil Brands, and then the brand was closed. The Russian most popular brand of export oil mixture, Urals, and in Saudi Arabia, Araplite. But relatively recently, another method of oil extraction has been discovered, with the help of hydraulic fracturing. This method was first used in the 2004 year in the state of North Dakota, which made it possible to extract high-quality light oil known as shale. Slates. These are dense rocks that are located lower than traps with conventional oil. In order to scoop it out, it is necessary to disrupt the structure of tectonic plates. You need a lot of fresh water. For one hydraulic fracturing, this is up to 3,000 tons. That is, 3,000 tons is, well, relatively speaking, an echelon of water. In addition, it means, accordingly, not just water is used, but all sorts of chemical reagents are used there, which then remain there or fall into the water pressure horizons. Environmentalists consider this method barbaric, harmful to both people and the environment. After such an oil field, chemicals enter the groundwater and poison all living things. But why are American politicians doing this? The fact is that oil is not only fuel. Have you ever thought that our entire modern world is a product of the oil industry? Don't you believe it? See for yourself. For example, one of the fractions of fuel oil is processed to produce paraffin, bitumen, liquid boiler fuel, oils. Petroleum jelly is also produced from oil. The oils obtained from black gold are used for the preparation of cosmetic ointments and creams. Petroleum polymers. When creating chewing gum, many medications, such as aspirin, are also oil. When you bake cupcakes and sprinkle vanilla on top of them, know that it is also made of black gold. Artificial fabrics, insulation materials for houses, shoe soles, and bicycle tires. All this is made from hydrocarbons. Only 50% of oil is motor fuel, and everything else, all these polymers, petrochemicals and plastics. Materials that cannot be produced from anything other than oil. As you can see, there is nowhere in the modern world without oil. But what happens if it ends? Or maybe its exhaustibility is also a myth. The fact that oil is about to run out began to be talked about back in the 19th century. But is it worth taking this forecast seriously? We actually operate with stocks here. Stocks that are accepted on the balance sheet and approved. And no one will invest in geological exploration if it means that for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you have fields on the balance sheet, respectively, firm where you can extract oil. According to rough estimates, oil reserves in our country alone will last for several generations. This is despite the fact that a significant part of the Russian territories has not yet been surveyed. This is especially true of Siberia and the Arctic region. We don't know what will happen in eastern Siberia. We don't know what's in the Arctic. We can only predict it, assume it. But even if we assume that at least some percentage, at least the same amount, will be found in eastern Siberia, then of course, this is like a reserve for energy for many decades to come. And here's the sensation. In February 2020 year, an international group of researchers made a loud statement. At the bottom of the oceans, unique cyanobacteria constantly form the petroleum hydrocarbon pentatoxin, which is one of the main components of diesel fuel. In a year, bacteria produce an amount of petroleum hydrocarbon that is comparable to the annual consumption of oil in China. There is evidence that oil is still being formed, in particular near volcanoes, that is, fresh oil samples were found. Using the radiocarbon method, it was determined that it was there for 50 years. It turns out that the rumors that the oil will soon run out have also not been confirmed. And the last myth is that black gold is mined only from underground. In Mexico, illegal immigrants steal up to 20% of petroleum products. Show trials, when whole gangs of 200 people are imprisoned at a time, do not solve the problems. This shocking video was shot in Colombia in July of the 2020 year. 7 people were killed and 60 more were burned after the tanker overturned, and the locals crowded with cans to drain their oil. And this is Nigeria, and also illegal mining of black gold. Often the deposits are located in tropical swamps. Illegal immigrants use boats to get to them. And this is what the furnace looks like, in which the oil is divided into fractions. But black gold is also stolen in our country. A 52-year-old resident of Novosibirsk has been digging a tunnel to the main oil pipeline for 3 years. In 2 weeks, he drained fuel for 550,000 rubles. When the man tried to sell the stolen goods, he was detained. My dad had one. It's just, well, whether I can do it or not. Residents of Kalmykia made an illegal tie-in on the territory of the Volgograd region and also started pumping oil. For what to detain? No. In the Orenburg region, the gentleman of fortune made not one, but even 2 tie-ins. From there, fuel was supplied to containers hidden underground. Then the black gold was transported by tanks to an illegal mini-processing plant. The damage amounted to more than 300 million rubles. And there are dozens of such stories only on the territory of Russia. In Russia, the volume of counterfeit fuel is estimated at more than $6 billion annually. The black gold thieves. Well-coordinated criminal groups, natives of the dashing 90s. But here's what's interesting. In the 2020, the number of thefts from oil pipelines worldwide decreased by 30%. Analysts attribute this to the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that the demand for oil was not so great at that time. In 1840th year, the Governor-General of Transcaucasia sent samples of newly extracted Baku oil to St. Petersburg, to the Imperial Academy of Sciences. And the verdict of the scientists was disappointing. According to them, this substance was suitable only for lubricating the wheel axles of carts. And 20 years later, the oil boom began in the world. And today, the world economy consumes more than 84 million barrels of oil per day. That's almost 13.5 billion liters. Plastics, gasoline, asphalt, computers, mobile phones, tanks, airplanes, medicines, cosmetics, there is oil everywhere. Nowhere without her today. In general, hydrocarbons rule the world. Of course, an alternative to oil will be found, but it seems that this will not happen soon.